Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Want to let you know the meeting's being recorded, as you heard, and let's take some roll call. Laura Fitzsimmons,
Present.
Joni Eastley, I believe I saw her. Yep, she's here.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to unmute myself. Yes, I'm here.
No problem. Chris June Kiliani, Jeff Wells, Drew Christensen, Kate Thomas, Lorena Dellinger,
We're not gonna have a quorum.
Commissioner Hall,
I'm here.
Harriet Cummings,
Here.
Allison Jaffe,
Present. Sorry.
and Jared Hickman.
Here.
I only come up with 6, Marcy.
So Sophia, can we proceed with items that we don't need a quorum for?
Oh, hold on. Looks like Chris is having a problem getting in. Then we'll be all right.
Laura, did you want to move on to public comment and Cindy can let us know when Chris joins?
Sorry, can we move to public comment?
Is there anyone that has public comment? The period is limited to 3 minutes. Please raise your hand if you'd like to make public comment. Laura, I don't see any public comment. Did you want to move on to number 3?
Thank you. Having heard no public comment, we're moving on to number 3, which is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting that was held June 16th, 2023. And
Sorry,
when am
Madam
I gonna
Chair.
have-
Real quick, can we just confirm that we do have a quorum? Did Chris join?
I just sent the link. Waiting for her to click in.
In the meantime, to answer your question, Marcy, we can move on to discussion only items. And if we move on to discussion only items, the board can take in information, but they're not to discuss anything.
Okay. Marcy, would you like me to ask you which, because we have discussion and possible action, are there any of our discussion items that you're confident, like for Professor Hanan's, that we would just be taking in information and not discussing?
Yes. Oops, my video stopped. I'm trying to send a link to Chris really quickly. So that's part of our issue. I have items for discussion on number 4. There will be no possible action. If it's okay to touch on that, Sophia, I was just going to update the board.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll take item number 4, budget and legislative update, understanding Marcy will be providing information that we will not be discussing, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
So thank you. I just wanted to update everyone on the board that we have received the 4th quarter reporting for all of the counties that are requesting reimbursement. And that's been provided to an attachment on the website. As you can see, we're looking about around $2 million needs to be reimbursed. The plan that's set forth so far is the department has requested the remaining $499,000 that was set aside in the statutory contingency account to be provided to those Davis counties. And we are scheduled for interim finance on August 9th. We have reached out also to all the counties and advised them that if they have had late reporting that came in after our meeting, that they can update their fourth quarter reporting or amend it. And we've asked that that deadline be set for the 15th. So sometime after August 15th, we intend to reimburse all of the rural counties. And with that funding that's been set aside, along with our supplemental appropriation of the $2.6 million, we will have sufficient funding to reimburse all the rural counties. And that's all I have on that, and can take any questions.
Marcy,
No, that's great news, Marcy.
Chris has joined the meeting.
Hi, Chris.
Thank you. Sorry, I had the wrong thing canceled on my, and the meeting ID would not work. So thanks for my patience, your patience.
Thanks, Chris. All right, so now my understanding is we could go back to the, maybe just to move things along. Marcy asked if there were questions on item number 4 after her presentation on the reimbursements. Certainly now we could take questions or discuss or comment. Is that correct, Ms. Long?
Yes, that's correct, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So anybody have any input in any way on item 4?
This is Chris. I think Marcy did a phenomenal job, and I think the rurals will be happy. And you know, I think in the long run, it's just one more way to show that the board on indigent defense is listening to everybody, making sure that things work through the process.
Yeah, I totally agree, Chris. All right, then we'll go back to item 3, the approval of the minutes. The minutes have been provided and reviewed by our board members. Does anybody have any proposed corrections?
Madam Chair, I thought they looked good. I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second,
Sorry, I'll second.
sorry.
Okay, can we have a vote on the approval of the minutes from June 16th, 2023?
All aye.
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 Any nays? Okay, the minutes are approved. Okay, the next item on our agenda is item 5, the oversight update. This is a 2-part update according to our agenda. Marcy, will you be speaking to this?
Tom will.
Oh, hi, Tom. Good.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, 2 items very briefly. You all have in your packet the fourth quarter of fiscal year 23's data and workload reporting. It's part of what we're using to inform our larger workload study. With every quarter, it gets more accurate. There are some holes that we still need to fill in that we will be working on in the next 3 months, and I'll address those a little bit more under the Davis update. And then as far as an oversight update goes, the main thing is the update on the Carson City corrective action. The Carson City Public Defender's Office is up and running. It's been functioning for about a month now, seems to be going pretty smoothly. It's almost fully staffed from what I understand. So good news, good job. Again, thanks to all of the Carson City leadership and to the leadership of the Carson City PD's office for making that happen in such a timely and efficient manner. I'll
Great.
take questions on that.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Tom or any comments? Everybody feel we can move on then to item 6? All right, item 6, corrective action plan submission and approvals, Story County.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll take that one as well. This is, basically just an extension of the Carson City corrective action plan. And so I distilled this one down. The department distilled this one down quite a bit. Essentially, the impetus for it was the critical understaffing of the state public defender's office at the time, mostly due to salary and budgeting issues. And again, Story County has worked really well with us, and we're also working with leadership in Carson City to come up with a interlocal agreement in which the new Carson City Public Defender's Office will serve as the primary frontline public defender's office for Story County. Additionally, Story County intends to enter into a conflict contract, I believe, for a second tier. So we're in the process of that. We have a transition plan that is underway and functioning, and we're just waiting on the finalization of the interlocal agreement. But before the board for action is the proposed corrective action plan and the amended indigent defense plan for Story County. So I would open that up for questions, and then at the proper moment, I guess we'll take a motion on that.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on the corrective action plan and the proposed whatever? Anybody want to talk about this?
No,
Okay, good work on everyone's behalf. All right, so then we need to approve the corrective action plan. Is that correct, Tom?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
All right, is there a motion to approve
this
the
is
Story
Chris.
County? Pardon me?
This is Chris. I'll make a motion to approve the Story County corrective plan.
Thank you, Chris. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All right, then everybody, I guess, in favor, say aye.
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 Any nays? Oh, all right, the Story County Corrective Action Plan is approved.
And
Madam Chair, may I ask one question about this? It's Joni in Tonopah. Marcy, what was Story County's reaction to this corrective action plan? Were they on board with it? Was there any negotiating that took place? Are they okay with this?
I can answer that if you want.
Yeah, please.
Story County actually approached us just as Carson City did. So yes, they're 100% on board. There are county representatives here. Austin Osborne, the Story County manager, is with us, and Langer, the district attorney, is with us. If they have any input, I don't know the proper procedure of that, them answering questions, but they could either confirm that or add anything or answer any other specific questions. But yes, they came to us.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
And to that end, I would invite anybody that's present at this meeting on behalf of Story County to speak if they feel that they want to at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Austin Osborne, Story County Manager. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I just want to thank you folks for working with us. Any questions you have, but we're in full support of this and really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Austin, nice to see your face.
You too. It's been a while.
Okay, so we've already approved item number 6. I appreciate Joni's question because and the statements made by Story County. I feel now, unless people want to do otherwise, we're going to move on to agenda item 7, which is the Davis update.
Madam Chair, I think under number 6, technically the board needs to also approve the Story County's amended indigent defense plan, which changes the fundamental change is just from the Nevada State Public Defender's Office filling the primary public defender role to the Carson City Public Defender's Office filling that role. But
Thank you, Tom.
Madam Chair, so moved.
Second. Is there a second? I'll second that. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? All right, so now the amended indigent defense plans submitted by Story County is approved. Thank you, Tom. Doesn't everybody miss Chair Mendiola? I know I do. Okay. Now we're moving to agenda item 7, the Davis litigation update.
Sure, that's mine as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's all Tom all the time in the middle of the meeting here. So I'll just address this briefly again. Professor Hanan, the Davis monitor, is with us, so she can answer any specific questions. She did, in her report, go through in some detail our successes in the 2023 legislative session. I discussed most of those with you in the last meeting, so I won't belabor that. I did want to quickly address some of her concerns, which were, and these are kind of repeated, insufficient staff for oversight, insufficient budget for training, insufficient resources for attorney recruitment. And all of those we are addressing under AB 518, which allocated funds to the department, contingency funds to allow for Davis compliance. And so our department is currently working with ASD to prepare the formal requests, also known as work programs, to get that funding and address those concerns. So again, another piece of great news from the legislature.
Okay, Professor Hanan, is there anything you would like to add, or you are available for questions should the board have any at this time?
Yes, thank you, everyone. I don't have anything to add, but I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Okay, anybody have any questions? It's I thank you for this report.
Madam Chair, I had some questions, but I called Marcy directly and she was able to answer them, but thank you.
All right, everybody feel comfortable if we go ahead and I guess there's no really potential action on this, is there, Marcy? It's just an update. We've read we've read the monitor report and update. I understand from the material it's been submitted to the court, or a request for submission was filed. And pardon me?
That is correct. So it has been submitted to the court, and like Tom said, based upon what's being recommended, we are taking actions by working with the finance office and admin services to see if we can get that funding. If we need action at a future meeting, we will schedule it for that.
Thank you. All right. So then the final discussion and possible action item, well, maybe not, is the executive order from Governor Lombardo. This is, yeah, we all have received a copy of the executive order. Marcy, what would you like to tell us about that?
And I think Peter's going to take this one.
Okay, all right, Peter.
I'll take this one briefly. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll briefly just kind of go over, you probably read it for yourselves. Basically, this is sort of reversing and kind of adding to that order that we addressed back at the February meeting, where we had that kind of a workshop to decide what regulations were eligible for repeal or revision to streamline them. Section 1 basically says that we can start doing that repealing, streamlining, clarifying, reducing, etc. Section 2 says we need to begin promulgating new regulations that were required from the last legislative session. Several of those apply to this board. Section 3 just indicates that the regulations that are adopted or implemented shall be concise and easily understandable. And I think that's probably a good governmental goal generally when we're writing regulations or laws. So I have no doubt this board can follow that order and directive.
All right, and obviously I doubt it'd be, or I believe it would be presumptuous of us to take any action on an executive order. So thank you for bringing this to our attention. And we will now close. We're now going to move on to agenda item number 9. So we're closing the regular agenda. And we're opening up the workshop that was duly noticed on July 17th, 2023. The purpose of the workshop is to receive comments from all interested persons regarding the potential adoption, repeal, or amendment of regulations that pertain to the Nevada Administrative Code, Section 180. There are 4 proposed changes. A copy of the proposed changes is attached to the workshop agenda. We will go through them one by one, and we will take comments per item. So please make sure to pay attention, and if you're commenting on and restrict your comments to each of those 4 items as it's being discussed. If you wish to comment on any of them, wait till it's called. And at this point, we don't see any reason to limit comments to any certain period of time. We do want to emphasize, however, that what we're doing now in this workshop is basically setting forth the infrastructure. We're trying to get the language for the proposed regulations. We are not actually adopting specific workload numbers for counties or to apply even generally to the rural counties. This is just putting the process or the infrastructure in place. So then at a subsequent hearing, we can address specific workload standards, hear from anyone who wants to talk about them, and then take those issues up at a later date. All right, so that being said, who's going to present the workshop material?
And Laura, we do have them split up a little bit, but I will be starting with the first one. And I did want to note for the record that Kate Thomas has joined us. So to begin, the first that we are requesting is to repeal the regulatory maximum contribution formula, which was contained in section 16 through 19. And just so that everyone knows, we are not getting rid of the maximum contribution formula. We're just taking it out of regulation because it has been placed into statute by Assembly Bill 518. So this regulatory language is no longer necessary. And we are asking for the repeal of sections 16 through 19 as it's duplicative and in statute now.
All right, is there any discussion on that?
This is Chris. Do you want, Madam Chair, to go item by item with the vote, or do you just want to do one at the end after if we have to make any recommendations?
Chris, I think we should do them one at a time, actually.
I think it might be easier.
Yeah, I think so too.
Madam
Okay,
Chair, if you're okay with that, then I would make a motion to approve items or the recommendations that Marcy made on items 16 through 19.
I'll second Chris's motion based on staff recommendation.
And Madam Chair, if I can just change the
thank you.
motion a little bit to adopt rather than approved, so to
Oh.
adopt the recommendation.
Thank you.
Sure.
I
Well,
move
thank-
to
Do you amend your motion, Chris?
Yes, I do. I move to adopt items 16 through 19.
The second,
Adopt
the second, yeah.
the
It's
recommendation. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Adopt the
you.
Yeah. The
Thank you, Ms.
second
Wall.
amends. The second
Okay.
amends.
All right, so now we have it in good language. And is there any discussion before we proceed to vote on that motion as seconded? Okay, let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? All right, the motion carries. The second workshop item is setting caseload workload standards for the rural counties. I spoke to this a little when we open the workshop. Who's going to present on this?
That would be me, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
And just briefly, again, like you indicated, this is really just to get the process rolling. So what this would modify would be section 42. As you can see, subsection 2 is stricken through. That was so that we could retain somebody to perform that workload standard. And the department did retain the National Center for State Courts. They're in the process of completing that study, and hopefully we'll get some useful data and information to then provide to this board and to the public to help build those workload and caseload standards for the state, for the rural counties. So that's why paragraph 2 is stricken. The new paragraph 2, just each county shall employer retain sufficient attorneys to meet the minimum number required. This is in accordance with the Davis stipulated consent decree. Basically, we've kind of left this open because we don't know what those numbers from the National Center for State Courts are going to be. We just want to be able to start getting moving with LCB to get the regulatory language started, to try and get an idea and a draft together as to what the regulatory scheme will actually look like, and then work with you and the public again to try and nail down what the numbers should be based on the results of that study.
I think that's a very smart approach. But do we have an ETA on the completion of the study? Any idea?
Our discussions with NCSC seems to indicate there'll be sometime in October, but they're not certain. It's ultimately up to them when we get the results back. But we do have an extension through the end of the fiscal year with the contract. So ultimately it needs to be done before then.
All right. And so obviously LCB, I'm sure, has a lot of things they're working on. So by starting now, hopefully we won't have a big delay after the study is completed and transmitted to us to start working with the stakeholders and considering what workload numbers will be in the rural counties. Is that correct?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Is there really anything, I guess we set what would the motion look like in your mind for this, for approval of workshop item B?
Madam Chair, I think you have some people from Carson that might want to make some comment on the regulation. And again, we're not adopting those numbers that are put forth. We will have a future meeting on that. We're just trying to regulate that structure, but it does look like they'd like to make comment.
Oh, good. And I'm not seeing hands up. So of course we want anyone, understanding that it's going to be a limited, not real limited conversation. We want to hear what you have to say, but we're not doing a whole lot today. But please identify yourselves and say what you want.
Hi, this is Nancy Paulson, Carson City Manager, and just looking at the preliminary numbers, it looks like Carson would have to increase the employees of the Public Defender's Office by, looks like, almost 5 employees. And we're just concerned with that because I think according to all the rules, if we increase the Public Defender's Office, in turn, we have to increase our district attorney's office employees, and that would come, at a large, cost to the city. So, and then just wondering if we do incur these costs, if they would be reimbursed by the state.
Marcy, I'm sorry, anything else from Carson?
Madam Chair, this is Todd Reese, a deputy district attorney. On this particular item, on number or the NRS 18320 2D4, it says that the board could establish guidelines to be used to determine the maximum caseloads. However, the subsection 2 that's proposed to be added is really a mandate to the county to meet those guidelines. And so there seems to be a dichotomy there between what's in statute and what's proposed as the regulation. I'm not going to purport to advise you on that. That's certainly not my role. I'm just hoping that you could look into that possibly with your DAG and make sure that's within the scope of the authority of the board. Thank you.
It seems like a very good point. Is that something that anyone feels we should address? It needs to be addressed, obviously, all these concerns. Is this the time for it, or should we wait till we get the study and have a meeting with Carson City where this is discussed and resolved, or at least we can truly identify any issues before the next meeting? Is that too much work? It wouldn't be before the next meeting, because if we're not getting this study till maybe the end of October, then it would hopefully be before the end of the year. Marcy, help?
Yes, and so just to touch upon a couple of those concerns, the reason that we have entered into this caseload study is we are specifically required under the Davis stipulated consent judgment to perform a Delphi study contract executed with the qualified provider, and that all of these standards be included in an indigent defense contract, and to confirm, like, to have compliance with the Delphi study workload standards within 12 months after the completion of the study. So the creation of this recommendation is based upon that weighted caseload study and the stipulated consent judgment. And I think the way that we can have, because each county has their own plan for the provision of indigent defense services and has set forth how they're going to be providing these services. So we really need to have the counties comply with the caseload. And the only way I know that we could do it is through regulation. I think the department is allowed to adopt any additional regulations it deems necessary or convenient to carry out the duties of the board and the provisions of this chapter. So even if it arguably doesn't fall under our authority that's specifically set forth, if the stipulated consent judgment requires that we adopt these guidelines and that we comply with it, I believe that we would be able to require the counties to comply. But obviously, when we sent this off to LCB, they are going to look at our proposed language and see whether or not it's appropriately written and if we have authority to do so.
Well, just to take these comments into, with respect, if we send this off to LCB, if that's our action today, there's still, we need to resolve, these are legitimate concerns, right? I don't know, where it lands. We don't know what the caseload study is going to recommend, but do you think it would be appropriate, not just with Carson City, but other cities or rural counties, to actually sit and address, because I'm pretty sure other rural counties are going to have specific concerns. Whether or not we can do something doesn't, and which I agree with you, we can and probably are mandated to under Davis, doesn't mean we can't try to figure out how it really does apply to each county. So, if that's, I'm just kind of gassing on and on. Are there any other stakeholders who would like to speak now about this before we go to a vote?
Yes, this is Josh Foley from Lyon County.
Hello.
Hello, I am the comptroller for Lyon County. The county manager asked me to step in for him because we have commissioner meeting today. So I drew the short straw, so to speak. There are a number of concerns that Lyon County has with this, and I did spend some time with Marcy discussing it. And I really appreciate all the effort she puts in for the state of Nevada and for us in particular. She's been fantastic to work with. And we discussed some of the issues, a couple of them that we discussed with this, and I don't have an issue per se with meeting. We don't really have an option on whether we meet the stipulation or not. We have to meet the stipulation. The question is the language and the study. And so I wonder if it's better to have this at the same time as we have the final study, so that we have the ability to put any input into that final study instead of adopting this and then you just adopt the study and we don't have as much discussion ability at that point because of the timing of those particular pieces. But it seems to me that this particular format and this study works fairly well for in-house public defender offices. For contracted public defenders, it doesn't take into account a number of factors, or maybe not as adequately as I would hope. And I do realize there's no perfect answer for this, and we're just trying to get to the best answer that we can all live with. So take what I say with a grain of salt with that as well. But a couple of things. Number one, it assumes that your attorneys are always going to not work overtime. I mean, that's essentially the way the study, as I understand it in discussion with Marcy, is that they're not working overtime. I'm a CPA by trade, and we work a lot of overtime, and attorneys work a lot of overtime. There needs to be a happy medium there, but to plan on no overtime whatsoever, that seems to be a little unrealistic. And I'm not sure how you factor that in, but maybe there's some type of dollar factor we can consider as we're finalizing the study. And I realize I'm speaking about the study specifically and not this particular language, but I feel they're closely enough related that I can speak on both. And of course, the AG's office will let me know if I can't. The second piece that it doesn't consider is when we contract, which is what Lyon County and many of the smaller counties do, when we contract our public defenders as independent contractors, it doesn't consider that maybe someone really wants to work overtime. You have a young lawyer supporting a family, and he's like, you know what? I want to work a few extra hours so I can pay for my vacation, for Christmas, for my kids, or whatever the case may be. And this effectively doesn't consider that particular type of a scenario, the way that it's formulated. I'm not saying there's a perfect way to formulate it. I'm just wondering if there's something we can look at with that. The second piece of it, which I thought of, Marcy, after our discussion, so I apologize for this, but it doesn't really contemplate, and maybe it does, and maybe we just need to work that into the final plan, but conflict attorneys. So my understanding is the total cases include all of the conflicts, but we're coming down to the number of attorneys that we need and looking at that, and somehow we've got to be able to figure out, well, what percentage of these are conflicts, so we know what to staff our prime non-conflict attorneys with that. And so that's one piece that I would toss in there. And so there are a number of other concerns as far as funding pieces and all of that as we go forward. I think Carson stated some of those concerns already. I realize the state is planning on funding the indigent defense piece of that, and we've got that in statute currently. I've been around long enough to know that statutes can change, and the state can implement some of those on the counties instead. And I shudder to see when and if, and hopefully that never happens, but if that happens. And so that's one of the reasons I think the rural counties really want to be careful as we get into this and see if we can do the best we can. And I know we've got good people at DIDS that are working with us and trying to figure out how to do it. And we all want the best indigent defense that we can afford. So with that, I think I will stop on this item. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for your time and your comments. I would just like to speak very quickly on kind of the underlying and completely understandable concern that the rural counties have based on history. You said you've been around long enough, so have I. And so have many members of the board, and I'm sure other people that are listening to this meeting. This only works, all of Marcy's work, all of the county's work, all of the board's work. It only works so long as the state of Nevada honors its commitment to fully fund indigent defense in the rural counties so that the counties do not pay more than their maximum contribution. And in my mind, even though I'm certainly from a very different perspective, but I was on, years of study committees that led up to this. I'm hearing from NACO, this only works if we assume, we have to, that the state is going to step up and do what it promised, do what's said in the preamble to the enabling legislation. And so I'm not at all discounting what you're saying or Carson City's concern, but the whole thing falls apart if the state pulls a rug out from under us. Mm-hmm. And the state would then have some very significant problems. And I think as it was shown by Marcy and her team's fine work during the session, the states so far, I mean, once people understand what this is, you know, it's really moving forward and commitments that we have made are being met. So I'm gassing on and on, but I just think it's important, you know, to articulate, we all agree with what you said and the concerns that are expressed. They're practical concerns. Like, for instance, I mean, the elephant in the room is how are we going to find indigent defenders? That's a whole nother problem that is not being addressed at this time with this agenda item. So are there any more comments from anyone that's in this meeting about about the request that Marcy has for setting caseload workload standards and requesting the I guess sending whatever it is, proposed regs, Marcy, to LCB for review, which will, because LCB has a lot going on. So we don't want to, in my mind, and I think staff gave us this information, we don't want to have to wait until we get the study, which could be November, December, to start asking LCB. And I think when it comes back from LCB, Marcy, will we have another opportunity to discuss it then?
Madam Chair, yes. We get it back and then we'd have a public hearing where we can see how their language comes back. And part of our issue is we didn't necessarily know how to write this language. And we did attach a document that kind of has proposed modification language. And maybe what we could say, instead of requiring each county to do it, maybe we could say something like each county plan shall provide for, you know, the minimum number of attorneys to comply or something like that. So then the county plans can set forth how they're complying with the caseload standards rather than specifically require a county to employ or retain, because not every county employs public defenders. Some contract with them. And I think we should leave it to the counties to set forth in their plans how they want to comply with it. You know,
would that require any amendments now of your proposed language, or is that something we could deal with after it gets back from LCB? Because I think that's important.
Well, I think we send this language to LCB and then they modify it. So we can talk about what language we want to send to LCB. So I would propose, if that's agreeable with Carson City and their concerns, that if we have it be the county plans shall set forth how they comply, or if the board likes that language rather than requiring the county to do that. And then not specifically saying they have to employ or retain, just setting forth how they're going to comply with this workload.
But I still have a question.
Okay, but we just talk about that issue? I mean, and obviously, Mayor, we want to hear your question. Marcy, I'm more comfortable with that. Just much more comfortable with that. But okay, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor. Can please speak?
No, you're okay. Thank you so very much. I think I'm reading the proposal on section 42, number 1. And really just asking a question of interpretation to make sure I'm reading it the same way you guys are reading it. So when I see any office, organization, or attorney who provides indigent defense services shall not accept a workload that by reason of its excessive size interferes with the attorney's competence, diligence, or representation. So is that then I'm just running in my mind when I read this, I'm attorney X under number 2 down below the caseloads at pretend, I don't care, 60. You can have 60 at a time or 100 at a time, and you try to give me 101. This legally says that the attorney has to turn it down. He can't take a caseload that exceeds the answer under number 2. And so while I kind of understand what you're trying to accomplish, and I really appreciated your opening remark about that, there's no reality to that. So are you telling me I'd have no indigent defense because all the attorneys have to say no, but I can't hire anyone and no one will take another conflict? I just want to make sure we're not creating people with no indigent defense, because now we put the caseload requirement on and they can't legally take another client. I just, sometimes I read things and I always am looking for what if it doesn't work? And then I want to know what the ramifications are. And what I don't want is a bunch of attorneys to be able to say, sorry, no more, I can't take one more case, I'm at the caseload. So I just, again, if you're thinking for the future and how you write things, I just bring that up. In my vast years of experience, people read things literally and they always come back to haunt us. But that's just a comment. Thank you.
Marcy, if you'd like to respond to that, or if not, I mean, it's certainly a good point.
And
Yeah.
Marcy, I can field that one if
Okay,
that's
Peter.
all right. Yeah, I just say, so section 42, that section 1 is already in the regulations, so we wouldn't be adding that. I think I'd mentioned that, like, when it says they shall not accept a workload, that like everything that follows that is modifying it. So it has to be a workload that is, one, excessive in size, and then it also interferes with that attorney's competence, diligence, or representation of their clients. So they already have an obligation under the rules of professional conduct
Right.
not to accept cases that interfere with their duty of competency and of diligence, those kind of things, to represent their clients effectively. So really, this is kind of a regulation that just kind of puts that in there. When you're reading these kinds of things in concert, like, it might be the case that an attorney, if there's a workload maximum, that they're exceeding the maximum, they can't accept an additional case because it does interfere with their competence or diligence or representation. But it might be the other is true, right? That maybe they've exceeded the workload standard, but they got really good offers from the DAs, so they've resolved all their cases already, and they should be spending time accepting more cases, representing more clients, and doing more work. And these are things that we definitely want to consider when we're moving forward with developing these standards.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other comments from anyone at this time, understanding this is the beginning, really, or maybe towards the beginning of a conversation about how this actually is going to be actually come down and work, as Mayor Bagwell said, in reality. Are there any motions if there's no more discussion?
Do you need a motion? What, Marcy, what would you prefer to
Thank you,
have?
Chris. Yeah, right. I have no idea.
Well, we have provided you with that language for 42 section 2 that we would like to repeal the current section 2 and modify it after the comments, if it's agreeable, to say each county plan shall provide, shall provide, and this is what we're struggling with the language, like sufficient, how shall set forth how they will comply with the workload standard by identifying the attorneys, which will cover the workload, or something to that effect.
What about if it was modified, each county plan shall provide something to meet the minimum caseload standards? So provide details or something. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yes, because every county kind of does it their own way. And some counties have part-time conflict attorneys, some have full-time conflict attorneys. And we really need to remain flexible because, it works for different ways in different counties. And we realize that when we're going out and meeting people. So our whole goal is, we know these counties want to comply. We need to be flexible and creative. So I think something like you've said, Madam Chair, just that the county plan set forth how they will comply, or details on how they will comply. And I don't know if there's thoughts on that.
Maybe
Okay.
with staffing, county plans will provide staffing sufficient to implement the plan. And the staffing could be contract, it could be whatever.
If, Madam Chair, if I could add just one comment.
Please,
I
please.
think it needs to say something about compliance with the workload standard. I think that's the Davis language. So if it just said something along the lines of each county plan shall set forth how it will comply with the mandatory workload standards.
Perfect. Do I hear a motion?
That's my motion. That we move to adopt the language suggested by Tom.
I'll second that.
Allison seconds it. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Is anybody opposed? All right, The motion carries, and I'd like to again reiterate that it's very clear that the counties are each separately and uniquely impacted and will be throughout this process. And I'm very grateful. We've heard that our staff has been very responsive in meeting concerns and being open to different ways that the county plans can incorporate the workload standards. And there will be another meeting on this, at least one, maybe two. Okay. So the next workshop item is setting an hourly rate in lieu of the $100 an hour set forth in NRS 7.125 for the 15 rural counties and for representation in post-conviction petitions for habeas corpus throughout the state. Who's going to speak to this?
I will, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
So as I think most people know, but if you don't, the last time the hourly rate was changed by the legislature was 2003, was set at $100. We had a data analyst who did a study to essentially say that $100 in 2003 is equivalent to 163-ish dollars right now. That was actually in 2022 dollars, so that was before some inflation. So this was one of our big missions in the legislature this year, was to be able to bring this in-house and have the board set the rate moving forward. For those of you also that know or don't know, the federal CJA panel, that's the Federal Indigent Defense Appointment Panel. The CJA group did a study a number of years ago, nationwide study, and came up with a rate to adjust their federal hourly rate to, and then they tied it to some cost of living things so that it automatically on the first of a calendar year increases. So our idea is to, our recommendation is, and that we'll open this up for discussion, to just mirror that rate and say, whatever the CJA rate is, that's what the rate that the board sets for rural state appointed council. And that rate right now for the feds is, we have it here somewhere, I think it's 168 or 164. I should have that.
64 and 210.
164 for, there it is, 164 for non-capital cases and 210 for capital cases. So the board sets what the CJA rate is this year, that's what it will be. But then on the first of every calendar year, that rate will automatically mirror whatever the CJA rate is. Another reason why we think this rate is appropriate is that that's essentially what other state agencies pay to the Attorney General's office right now, is $163 an hour. So it's right in line with that, which provides us, kind of additional parity there. We do understand that in the wake of the kind of crisis of scarcity of indigent defense lawyers, there are some counties, at least one county, paying significantly more than this. And it isn't that, specifically Washoe is paying significantly more than this right now. And it isn't that that rate might not be fair or fair for Washoe. We don't know what that rate increase was based upon. So we feel comfortable with this range because of the data, the extensive data that was behind the CJA rate setting, and because it's the same as the AG's rate, we feel comfortable recommending that rate at this time. We're also kind of just trying to find the sweet spot where we don't get significant backlash from either the legislature or the governor's office, which, could crash part of what we're trying to do here. So I guess that's probably enough setup. Oh, there's one thing we wanted to add to one sentence we wanted to add at the bottom of this proposed language. And that's that in order to address, sort of momentary crises like we've seen right now, or a situation where a county has a really complicated case, or for whatever reason, indigent defense counsel in that county are really scarce right at that moment. We wanted to add language, quote, "This rate may be modified as deemed reasonable and necessary by the executive director of DIDS for good cause, including the complexity of the case and the scarcity of qualified attorneys." That's just proposed language. We can play with that also if you guys want. So I guess I'll stop talking and we can open this up for discussion.
Um,
I'd like
yeah,
to
good.
jump
Ms.
in.
Jaffe?
So the AG rate of 163 does not include for the AGs, PERS, insurance, FICA, Social Security, and PTO. So we're not equalizing. And I thought the 300 was much more enticing to lawyers competent lawyers who would want to come in and work. I don't think 163 is that much, and it's not reflective of what the AGs actually get.
Well, it's what's paid to the AG by the agencies that they represent, like by the boards.
Correct. So
Right,
this
and they
isn't,
get all their perks too. The AGs receive exactly all their
exactly.
perks.
sure. And I mean,
Yeah, this is Chris. I think 163 is way too low. It's barely what they pay a substitute teacher for a whole day. So I don't think it would be something that would help attract. I'd like to look at the 300 because then it gives us some opportunity to actually attract, I think, better people that are more qualified into covering some of those.
so just to clarify, the 300 rate from Washoe County is only for category A cases. So
Right.
that's only for murder,
Right.
sex assaults, high level cases. The rest of them are set at 200 an hour for all other regular felonies and 150 for misdemeanors. We had discussed, just to throw this out there, we had discussed the possibility of a 3-tier to do a death penalty rate, a Cat A rate, and then a rate for everything else. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to pay, a juvenile different, a misdemeanor different, and a low-level felony different. I think all of those should be grouped into one thing, but it might make some sense to do category A separate.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I used to work under the old rate back in the old days. And that was really for a long period of time, most of my practice. And at that point, the state rate was the same as the CJA rate. And but I'll tell you, I'm shocked that I know you accounted for inflation, but $100 went a lot farther back then than $168 goes now. I don't know how to handle it. I'm not comfortable. I mean, there are two ways. Adopting your proposed 3-tier, because I think that's really important, is a really good suggestion. I also think what you talked about, adding that this is basically a floor, but in exceptional circumstances or whatever your language was, the executive director can approve a higher hourly rate. And if obviously, but I think I'm not quite frankly comfortable with this as written. And I don't know if we need Marcy to get this off in the same packet to the LCB. If so, we should roll up our sleeves and get language that we're all comfortable with. What does the board think?
This is Chris. I think, and maybe Tom, correct me if I'm thinking wrongly. The 163 average, that was based on AGs, but those are staff attorneys. So they get PERS and they get health benefits and they get all the other pieces. So they're probably closer to a 250, 280 in reality. So is there a way to maybe differentiate between those that are all, that are staffers rates versus those that are contracted, because you're not paying them the other benefits, but it might be a way to attract a better quality person. And I don't know.
And if I could just, it's Marcy, if I could just respond to this. The 163 per hour is what they charge agencies for their hourly fee. Sophia does not pocket $163 for showing up. She's a salaried employee and likely makes, in the $50 to $60 an hour range, if that. If we look at the compensation schedules, I'd have to go confirm. So attorney generals are not making $163 per hour.
Got it.
They look at all of their costs as a whole. That's including all of the benefits, the building, everything like that. And Sophia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they've determined that the rate that they need to charge agencies to cover their overhead and all those associated costs is $163 per hour. So that's what we repay to the Attorney General's office.
Okay. That
I'd
helps.
like, can I jump
Allison,
into?
Ms. Jaffe?
Can we ask Todd Reese, what are the DAs getting paid now?
That was my
They,
next.
yeah, they formed an association and they're getting paid more.
This is Todd Reese. Unfortunately, you're asking a little bit the wrong person.
Wait,
but
but if you
but-
give us a second.
Yeah, we do have it. Unfortunately, I'm not, the association that was formed was the Association for the Criminal Attorneys. I'm a civil attorney for the city, and by statute, I'm not permitted to unionize. Largely because the giving advice to the city and unionizing would probably be taking a
Yeah.
but at any rate, I think that Nancy might have that data. If you give us a little bit, I think we can find it.
We just did it.
Great.
Marcy, is this something that we does everything have to go in one bundle to LCB?
We are hoping that we can roll up our sleeves and get this done because we have several problems. Number one, the post-conviction rate can't be modified by the counties. So we have a lot of attorneys out there that are doing post-conviction, and the most they can make is $100 per hour, even if the local counties say they'll pay local attorneys more. Number two, those state cases, the prison cases where we need appointed counsel, the state is only paying that $100 an hour unless we go out to some bidding process because we can't find anyone to take it. So if we could start making these changes now, the department would greatly appreciate it. And I'm sure every attorney that's on this phone call would greatly appreciate it, because our goal is to make this get done as quickly as possible so that we can pay them a fair wage, and so that we can get more people interested in indigent defense.
Thank you very much. How about if we adopt the language that Tom had talked about that would be added about basically this is a floor, this hourly rate, the CJA with cost of living is an hourly, is a floor, and the executive director based on extraordinary circumstances and the complexity of the case. That would add in the 3 tiers, can approve a higher rate. That way you can, if there is blowback, as somebody said, from the legislature or the governor's office, we can actually demonstrate why in this case, this rate was approved by the executive director. No one in the world would have taken this case at this rate, and we couldn't find anybody, but whatever needs to be done. Would that language adding in the complexity of the case satisfy your concerns? And if so, can somebody read it?
I can read that sentence again if somebody wants to take this down for official purposes, or I can just keep it and put it in the record. But the language that we had was, this rate may be modified as deemed reasonable and necessary by the executive director of the Department of Indigent Defense Services for good cause, including the complexity of the case and the scarcity of qualified attorneys.
This is Chris. Can I just ask then, Tom, would that, or Marcy, would that I think you've got some standard language there that allows the executive director to go exceed that 163 based on X, Y, and Z. They make a finding. And then what do they do once that finding's been made? How do you, so that there's not finger pointing that comes back?
Yeah, it's case by case and county by county. So, so whenever there's a case that we're unable to place, we sort of enter into dialogue with whoever the point person is in the county to ask for approval right now.
Right.
And so what this would do would just bring that in-house. So Marcy or whoever sits in her chair would be able to make that determination, and it keeps the system kind of stabilized where we don't see a bidding war kind of going on, but also allows for the flexibility of those circumstances. Additionally, I think it's possible for us to go ahead and set out that, you know, that it could be a third tier. I don't know how we do that language, because it's different than saying we're just following the CJA rate.
I think you've covered it, Tom, by saying complexity.
Okay.
I think, you know, I think that's covered. Rather than your term modified, I'd like to say this rate may be increased.
Okay. I like
Yeah,
that. Thank you.
yeah, you want to indicate that the 163 is a base. It's not, they cannot go lower than that amount. So we should be clear on that too.
Right. I also want to say, as far as what started in Lyon County and has spread a little bit, the counties are always, outside of this statute, the counties or this reg, counties are always free to contract with individual attorneys under NRS chapter 260 to provide higher rates as well.
Would they get reimbursed though?
Yeah,
Oh, right on.
I mean, you know, I'm sure there's some sort of reasonableness review at some
Right.
point, but no, that's not the issue right now.
Okay. All right. Well, I feel like between my chicken scratch and the collective brain trust, we would modify, let's see, we got to turn it back over.
Madam Chair, you have a couple of people with their hands raised.
Oh, sorry.
I also see
Okay.
Lori Bagwell.
All right. Please speak.
Hi, this is Nancy Paulson, Car City Manager. On the hourly rates that you were asking about for just a deputy district attorney, the hourly rates go from $40 an hour to $55 an hour. And then if you go up to like a supervising deputy district attorney, it's $55 an hour to $77 an hour.
Okay.
But
That's
Mayor,
good.
does that include, that doesn't include a consideration of overhead, correct?
Right,
Correct.
that's just the salary.
Just the employee.
Once you add benefits to like the supervising, you're up to almost $200,000.
And
Yeah.
Madam,
And then staff and printer supplies and all that. But that's, thank you for that information.
Madam Chair, I think we should note that in Carson City, for the first time, the public defenders have pay parity with the district attorneys. So what did your public defenders make? So
Okay, and there, Mayor Bagwell, did you have something to additional to talk to or to?
Nope, just wanted to impart the information you requested.
Thank you. All right, so getting back to this.
Madam Chair, I think Hank Cummings has.
Oh, hi, Hank.
Hi, this is Harriet Cummings. I just wanted to express concern that even taking into account the additional language that Tom has proposed adding, so it entitled to receive a fee of X dollars per hour, and I understand that the idea is to tie that in with the CJA rates. But as written, then we're sort of locked into those numbers at this time, and presumably the CJA rate would be modified over time. So is there any way that this could be written to say that the rate is commensurate with the CJA rate so that as the CJA rate increases, then this Nevada rate would increase as well.
That's the intent of the language. We can certainly try to modify that, but that's why it says the prevailing CJA rate at the time of service. Because again, the CJA rate does change every year with the calendar. So on January 1st,
I'm
there's a
not
new
seeing
rate.
that. What
I'm
page is
not
that on?
seeing it either.
So what Tom is referring to is if you look at the items, we did put together a workshop item 3, setting the
Right.
hourly rate, which is a separate attachment.
Oh,
And
okay.
initially, when we had written this, we had to give notice 15 days ago. So we didn't know at the time, so we just put XXX, but we created a new document under workshop item 3, setting the hourly rate, where we talk about what the current hourly rates are so that you could see them. And then on page 2, we have that new recommendation to say that you're entitled to receive an hourly compensation rate of the prevailing CJA panel attorney hourly compensation rate at the time of service.
I see.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. Oh, here we go.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, thank you, because we were working off the XXX page. All right, well, Tom, do you feel, I think we've had a kind of a meeting of the minds. It's just how we articulate it.
There's also a written comment chat.
Written comments?
It looks,
Jason, if he wants to jump in, I just wanted to make sure it was recognized.
the comment reads, Nancy Polson mentioned a rule that requires district attorney office to be staffed with the same attorneys, with attorneys at the same level, indigent defense attorney levels. Can someone give me a citation to this rule, regulation, or statute? And I don't know if is that a collective bargaining agreement or specific to Carson or something otherwise? We don't know.
Yeah, I'm glad somebody asked that question because I forgot to when Ms. Paulson had mentioned it.
Yeah, I just all the language through the DIS regulation talks about parity between the district attorney's office and the public defender's office. And I know when we were establishing the public defender's office that Ms. Reba was going through making sure that we had equal or the same employees in parity with the district attorney's office. So I don't know that there's a specific regulation, but I'm assuming that if we add 5 attorneys to the public defender's office, that our DA's office will be asking for 5 also.
Right. I understood parity to mean pay parity. Maybe I'm wrong. Marcy?
That's correct. Our regulation does call for salary parity, and that's what we're referring to bring in the public defenders at the same pay as the district attorneys. So there's specifically a regulation about salaried public defenders must be paid the same amount as, the opposing counsel, and I can find that regulation.
Yeah, I think we're all aware of that, but there's nothing that says for every DA you need a PD or for every PD you need a DA. It's just to the extent that staffed, they need to have pay parity. Is that correct? That's what we've always been working with.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It's
And is
limited
it-
to the salary. It is in Clark County too, so yeah.
Is it pay parity like by county
Yes.
or overall?
Yeah. No, it'd be by
So-
county.
So a full-time public defender in Carson City is gonna make 200,000?
If they're a supervisor.
Yes, so specifically, it's section 39 of our regulations says an attorney who receives a salary for providing indigent defense services is entitled to receive a reasonable salary, benefits, and resources that are in parity, subject to negotiated collective bargaining agreements if applicable, with the corresponding prosecutor's office that appears adverse to the Office of Public Defender in criminal proceedings.
Yeah. Okay. So can we get back to this? I mean, I think we all, thank you. And thanks whoever asked that written question. Thank you, because it went by me. My neurons misfired. Okay, so we were working off of the XXX sheet. We now have, Allison and I were, so I'm not sure everybody else was. Do we believe that we have a language sufficient with the addition that Tom discussed that the rates can be increased, by the executive director? Can we move forward on that agenda item? Do we feel comfortable or should we
This
I
is
guess-
Chris. I feel comfortable, but I think maybe we just need to restate it for the minutes so it's
Yes.
clear what we're adopting at this point. Because there's been some wordsmithing that's gone pretty good.
Okay,
Thank you, Chris, for saying that because I was getting a little lost.
and I think I'm lost, but I
You're
think,
younger than me.
Just to clarify that, is everyone going off the supplemental draft of the department recommendations for this and not looking strictly at number 3?
I'm not saying CJ.
That's where the language is, and it's mostly at the very bottom where it talks about the prevailing CJA panel attorney hourly compensation rate. Does everyone have that?
Yes, we do. Thank you. It's
Yeah.
3 pages.
It word for word, so they have it from the beginning. Read what we're proposing.
Okay. So the full proposal is the hourly rates of compensation for court appearances and other time reasonably spent on indigent defense services or representation for sub A in a county whose population is less than 100,000, an attorney other than a public defender who is selected pursuant to NRS 7.115 to provide indigent defense services, or B, in all counties, an attorney who is appointed pursuant to NRS 34.750 to represent a petitioner who files a post-conviction petition for habeas corpus is entitled to receive an hourly compensation rate at the prevailing CJA panel attorney hourly compensation rate, that may be redundant, at the time of service. And then the added sentence that isn't printed out on here is, this rate may be increased as deemed reasonable and necessary by the executive director of the Department of Indigent Defense Services for good cause, including the complexity of the case and the scarcity of qualified attorneys.
Okay, do we have a motion to adopt that regulation?
This
We'll
is
make a
Chris.
motion to adopt that recommendation is just read into the record by Mr. Wallace.
And I'll second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? All right, so we are going to adopt that language the department has recommended as read by Mr. Claus at this hearing. Okay, the next item in the workshop is amending the bids regulations, BIDS regulations, to make the language in the remaining language, this is verbatim, I'd say in the remaining regulation, clearer and more concise to be consistent with the board's intent. Who's going to present this?
Madam Chair, I am going to start this off, and we've split this up among us. The reason that we're making these,
Marcy, could you point us to the, to what we're looking at? Because I think the problem is we have 8/3/23 workshop. But we also have the one I had for the last one was different. It was just the one page without the CJA.
we are referring to the bids. It should say bids workshop at the very top in blue. And
7 pages?
yes,
Great.
we're on page 7. It's a total of 14 pages.
Got it.
So the reason that the department has set forth these regulations is, as we've been working with counties to create their plans, we've noticed some issues that we've had coming up. So we're hoping to maybe clarify some of these issues so that we know what the board's intent is and so that we can comply with it. In section 22, we require that when we're having panels of attorneys, that the notice of that job opportunity is posted and there's a reasonable opportunity to apply and respond to that if you're interested. We would like to expand that to also individuals who are going to serve as the public defenders and chief public defenders of a county public defender office, because we want to make sure that that net is thrown out as wide as possible. And currently, there's a question as to whether or not counties need to post if they're hiring for their organized office public defender or chief public defender, or if they can just hire you know, based on any sort of internal determination. So we were requesting that we add that in section 22, section 1. In number 2, you know, this is a linguistic thing. I know Jared probably will have strong feelings about this. We are proposing changing must to should. I know Jared thinks that should and must are kind of the same thing, but we're asking that it say must. And then subsection 4, we've run into issues where individuals that are not fully qualified are given contracts to handle every case. So they'll be required to handle those category A cases, even though they don't have that qualification to do that. We've worked independently with each county as to how they can fix this issue if it comes up, but we think that the county plan should provide for that process. So if a county chooses to retain an attorney that's not fully qualified, but if they're expected to do those complex cases, that the plan set forth how they get a second chair and what that process is. So those are the changes that we're asking be made to section 22. And I can answer any questions, or do you want to discuss one at a time, or I don't know, Madam Chair? What you'd like.
Well, you know, for my part, I wholeheartedly approve. I think these are all issues we've all dealt with, and these changes are consistent with our long-term intent. So obviously I'm not cutting off any discussion, but if anybody wants to speak to it, please do. If not, I'm ready to request that there's a motion to adopt.
So moved.
We have a comment from Lori Bagwell, or Carson City.
Yeah. So just in general, I'm just trying to understand, are you usurping potentially Carson City's hiring practices? Because we determine in the normal sense of things, let's just use the example that we just had, where we needed to stand up a public defender's office in days, right? And so this would usurp. You're saying I can't do an emergency hire on a 3-day. So we already have all our own rules in place for hiring practices. And what I want to make sure is, while I understand you want to make sure there's an opportunity, a wide net to get great employees, and I get all that. But on the opposite side, I want attorneys in the office providing services, not creating all the other problems of now I've got over caseload to the 5 attorneys left in the office because I have to do a 30-day announcement or something. I just want to make sure you're not counteracting one point to get another. The objective for me in Carson City on all of our jobs is it's a case-by-case answer. If I'm short attorneys, instead of a 30-day opening, we may authorize a 14-day. So I just want to bring that up.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important, Mayor Bagwell, and thank you for bringing it up. I want to talk generally about the proposed regulation, but first I think I need to address what, Carson City just went through, which was a very unusual circumstance. I certainly had heard, having been involved in conversations with Carson City on this, when the problem was being addressed before the action plan was approved. I think Carson City already kind of knew who it wanted to hire. I am, I guess, understanding from your concern about being usurped that you didn't, kind of just went to that person and said, hey, you want to come in, and maybe you didn't post it so that other people could have applied. Personally, I don't. You did. Well, then that's fine. That's all it's saying. And it's not talking about the individual lawyers. It's talking about the key lawyers, either a public defender or a chief public defender, that a county who hires, not, just a line deputy PD, but if those positions are hired, the job should be noticed. That's what I'm saying. The process must be designed to provide notice of the opportunity to apply. and a reasonable opportunity for interested parties to respond. This is section 1, in which you're concerned about. I believe that's what you did do with the recent hires. And we just want to make it clear that it's not, this doesn't go for who then your new public defender hires. They, that's what you're concerned about with staffing. So I think I hope that we've addressed that. All we're saying is, at this level, you got to notice the position. And you did that. So Marcy, am I missing something?
No, I think Carson City was wonderful to work for. That's part of the reason this was brought up is, does this board want those public defender and chief public defender positions to be noticed so that there's that reasonable opportunity to apply? When we had talked to Todd Reese, it wasn't necessarily clear at the time. So we just wanted to bring it to the board's attention of, would you like to make it clear? But the board, or Carson City, was wonderful to work with. They posted the notice. They gave us a copy of it. We sent it out to our listserv, and they kept it out for a period of time where people could have responded if they wanted to, in our mind. So we felt that met that, but there was a question of, do they even have to post a notice, or can they just hire who they want to hire?
Well, Mayor Bagwell, does what I said, and more importantly, what our executive director said, does that address your concerns? We're actually ratifying and adopting what you did, not usurping anything. That's what I understand.
Let me give you the example. So in Carson City currently, and so I'm going to use the example, doesn't even matter what office, the chief public defender. I don't necessarily, maybe I want to promote them into the public defender position without noticing. So we typically hire deputies in offices to be the new director. And I don't notice that one because we already have work experience. We already know that's the candidate. And then we would go out to notice maybe for the chief public. And so I want to make sure that you're not precluding us from our standard rule of internal hiring the great candidate right up into the public defender. I guess that's my only question.
But when you would do that, wouldn't you at least not notice that the job was open and then hire the person, you think?
No.
Well, I think that might be unfortunate, but it's not. Marcy, how do you feel?
Right.
I mean, obviously, if you think the perfect person's already there as a deputy, you get to hire him. But, maybe just the notice, just posting the fact there's an opening. I don't know, Marcy.
I think for transparency, it really makes better sense, no matter what, that the posting, even if you've identified somebody with the skill set, somebody could be working that you didn't know, or come into the flow, and at least it gives you still, even as manager or mayor, an opportunity to be able to just check and balance yourself.
I mean, I think that's what Washoe County did recently when they had an opening. They posted it, they had applicants, and they, I believe, ended up hiring the chief deputy. I mean, that's your call. But I think unless, no disrespect, Mayor Bagwell, but I don't know, did the board have any more input on that?
I don't like employees to think they have a chance for a job if we really aren't going to. I wanted to just be fully honest that when we currently in Carson City hire our deputies into our director slots without noticing, because otherwise they're unclassified, and we would have gotten, bluntly, we would have gotten rid of them if they weren't up to the level of a deputy.
Right. And I think pretty much everybody knows that.
Right.
I mean, I just think for a uniform, that's Carson City's policy. This is a regulation we're looking at for our rural counties, which may not have, the abundance of even having a chief deputy. I mean, everybody's has a different situation in the rural counties to which this regulation would apply. But as long as you just post a notice, you can say, don't waste your time because we're going to appoint our chief because we know they're great. But just let it, as Christian Kiliani said, just for transparency. And you could get, who knows, the most brilliant lawyer in the world applying. I doubt it, but Nobody wants to be.
I just think, Madam Chair, I think that's a disingenuous. Why set up a case of unrealistic expectations on either side, where the ideal candidate who's been identified in-house assumes that they're going to get the position, and the same for somebody who's applying from the outside. They think the position is open because it's being advertised. I don't see why, if Carson City identifies the ideal candidate in-house, why they can't just go ahead and appoint them. Because the whole point is that we want to provide qualified individuals to serve the indigent population.
I think that
This is
it's,
Allison Jaffe.
sorry, I think it's inappropriate to just say, okay, we're gonna post, we really don't want to, and choose our person. I mean, all of the other divisions in the state and public agencies post, because you don't know who you're gonna get, who may be great. And why are you promising to one person when you don't know what's out there? I think that's, I think it's inappropriate. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, we all obviously, because Johnny, obviously, I never disagree with you. I know better. I see everything everybody said. Is there a fix to this? So we can keep moving forward?
Read the language again, one more time. I still think for transparency, it does not harm your ability as managers to be able to hire whom you think is best, especially since they know your processes and regulations and so forth. That's the key part. But to avoid the issue or the perception of cronyism, then I think one needs to just say, hey, we're flying this job. And we have in-house people that are qualified. It's not a disrespect out of them. You could do your wording on the way you fly your advertisement. But you never know what you don't know if you don't at least publicly notice something.
And to that end, to follow up, Chris, I agree with you. You can tailor the job description in the notice to make it pretty clear.
Of experience, yeah.
Yeah. So,
but Madam Chair, wouldn't, if there's an in-house promotion, wouldn't that make the position of the person getting promoted, wouldn't that open up their position that could then be advertised?
Yes. Well, why would you advertise it if you don't advertise the boss position?
yeah, and
Where does it end?
Because it's an in-house promotion.
Well, sometimes
Really?
in my experience, people apply like it because for the big job when it's being vacated, because they think nobody else wants to, or because they're worried that some idiot that they don't like in the office is going to get the job. I mean, you don't, I think it's overly optimistic, but it's been said by several board members, you don't know what you don't know. What's the harm in posting it for transparency so it doesn't look like cronyism, tailoring the job description so that it's very clear that unless you've had, experience as a supervising public defender in a rural office for 6 years, you're not going to get the job. I mean, we're spending, in my mind, more time discussing this than it would take to notice the thing and have that. This is not just a Carson City reg. It's a reg through the state. Carson City can work through it. I don't really care either way, but I'd sure like to move forward. Because the other provisions in this are, to my mind, more important.
Well, I disagree with that. I think there are, what about a lawyer who in Lyon County who was working for Lyon County who lives in Carson, wants to come into Carson, and so they're never going to get the job because they're not going to get an interview. And I don't like that this is a Carson City only issue. I don't think statewide, we have to go out because you don't have anybody. And Carson City, why do they get a different shot at it? I mean, you had to go out when you just hired a bunch of people, there was no office, so you had to go out to other counties.
Is
Madam,
there, a wa- yeah, sorry, go ahead, Marcy.
you have several people with their hands up.
Oh, Lord, okay.
Jacob has his hand
Can
up.
we take a break? I mean,
Yes,
does anybody mind? Is that inappropriate? Yeah, I will, you know what? I will never chair a meeting again. If Chairman Mendiola, we would have been like, on the golf course by now if he'd been chairing this. Does anybody object if we take a 10-minute break and resume at 10 minutes to 3? Is that okay, everybody? All right, thank you. Okay, I'll mute us. Our video's back on. What did we say? I think we have 3 more minutes.
Yeah, 10 to, well, we said, what, 10 to?
Did we say 10 to?
Yeah, 2:50.
Let me call Marcy.
Carry your mic is sitting on.
Hi, I think we have slight concern of losing quorum. I don't know if we can call back the board members and the participants in the workshop a couple of minutes early. If that's
Sure.
possible. I don't want to leave anybody out.
And it looks like Cassie Hall left the meeting, but we still have a quorum because Kate Thomas has joined.
Thank you, Kate.
Madam Chair, could somebody reread the language?
I'm happy to, unless Marcy, you or someone in your office wants to.
I can read it. So the issue that we're discussing, I believe, is section 22, subsection 1. A plan for the provision of indigent defense services must provide the process a county will use to hire attorneys who, and this is what we'd like to add, serve as the public defenders and chief public defenders of a county public defender office, comma, are independent contractors to provide indigent defense services and panels of appointed attorneys. The process must be designed to provide notice of the opportunity to apply and a reasonable opportunity for interested parties to respond.
This is Chris. Think that that language sums up exactly what we should want to have happen. And I appreciate Carson having us think through this process. This doesn't change your ability to hire. It just properly gives notice, especially in an area that's pretty selective as far as qualifications and experiences. And as Allison said, what if you got somebody that resides in Washoe that, has even more skill sets? It just gives, you still have the opportunity to hire whom you choose, but properly noticing that there's an open position, I think is just far better for transparent government.
All right, I agree, Chris. We understand there are other people who want to, that want to speak, and we're in a workshop, so we want to hear from everyone. I'm not seeing the raised hand. Josh Foley, I see is a raised hand.
Yes, thank you. And I don't have a dog in the fight because currently we don't have an in-house one, but I can tell you being, having the Department of HR report to me and having had that for a number of years now, for our county, we have a number of ways through both collective bargaining agreements and general policies where if there's a vacancy in anything other than an elected a position, they have the opportunity to either open it up to department only, or open it up a position to county-wide only, or open up a position to the entire world. And my personal opinion is I think that is a prerogative of the county commissioners, or should be a prerogative under the way statutes are. And so I can see where this language, I understand the philosophy of let's get the most qualified person in there, and I agree with that 100%. What I have seen in practice many times is we've encouraged people to open it up to the world. They do. And we hire the internal applicant that everyone knew was going to be the shining star. And what we've in fact done is wasted valuable time of a lot of people externally and internally going through the interview process. So just a little bit of experience for you to consider there. Again, I don't have a dog in this particular fight yet.
And if I can speak to that, obviously, these are really good points. I believe that there is a unique perspective here from this board, because in all of the work that's been done for 2 decades to get to this point, the state has assumed liability if something gets screwed up, not the counties. So, hypothetically, if a county's just not willing to open it up and at least see if there's somebody else. I mean, as we can tell, nobody is like battering down the doors to take these jobs. It just isn't happening. But let's say while we're talking about this, my cousin Vinny is the, air designee internally in a county to get the job. Well, if that really all goes south and there's adjudication of liability for IAC, it's not the county that's going to pay that judgment. It's the state of Nevada. So I do think it's a little different here than in normal hiring by counties of staff. So that's why, I get it, but because the state accepted the liability, I really believe the state should at least ask for transparency and to at least have, all applicants considered. And if the plan, which is what this is talking about, says absent, we'll notice it, but absent extraordinary circumstances, our plan in X county is to hire internally, then that plan may be fine. Is there anyone else that, I get it, but.
Yeah, Laura, I'm looking at the state of Nevada's hiring, and because it is, you're right, it's a fallback as the county's responsibility. They have their selection process. You could post this and have your qualifier on the job posting saying, this is currently da 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 da, or we're looking for someone internal or whatever, so that there's flags there, but at least somebody can say, I didn't know that position was open. Why didn't we get an opportunity? You put the onus away, or the argument away that somebody wasn't being treated fairly. And I think that saves you time and money and morale internally as well. I think you can craft it without violating what each county's hiring process is, but this is state money that's going to fund it. And I think they'll come back and look at our selective process at the state and Nevada's level and say, why aren't you posting?
Mhm. Okay, can we move on? Are we gonna, I would like to vote this up or down as one, this agenda item as something that we move to adopt in its entirety unless I'm wrong. Somebody tell me if I'm wrong.
Madam Chair, I'd like to hear from Marcy on this.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you. So again, like we said before, the purpose of this is to get clarification from the board as to what your intent is. Currently, it's required that plans for the provision of indigent defense services have to provide how independent contractors are hired by the county so that there's notice provided. What we've run into the question of is, if they have an organized public defender's office, do they also have to provide to us the process that they're going to use to hire? We don't have an objection to what's been testified to here, that it could be done internally first and then go countywide or whatever they want to set forth. We just want to understand how each county is selecting their public defenders or how they actually get hired. So we're just seeking clarification from the board as to our interpretation that counties that have public defender offices should let us know what this is so that the board can review it and make sure that they agree with it, that it's appropriate to get the best candidates. So that's the reason that we're asking for that. Again, even though it's not been discussed, we're also asking for that additional language in number 4, that if counties do hire those independent contractors that are not fully qualified and expect them to do all types of cases, that the plan has to tell us how they're going to get coverage if that person isn't qualified for cases they're assigning them. So that's what I'd like to just add to the record.
I'd like to address that specifically. We are, as lawyers, we're different. We have a code of conduct that we have to answer to. And if we're hiring people who are not experienced and who are not able to do the job. So let's say we have, we're hiring somebody, just a public defender, to do litigation, and this person hasn't done litigation or chooses not to do litigation. Either that person is not appropriate because all of their cases, could get overturned because of their lack of ability, or they have to accept what the county, if the county thinks, okay, we've got really experienced people and we can bring them along, we have a plan for that, then I think we have to look at that, because these are not regular employees.
I'm unclear whether we're now discussing, I agree, obviously, but whether we're now discussing this entire section 22, because we're talking about section 4, which to me is the most important section. Or we're just, I think unless anybody else wants to talk about subsection 1, Marcy, is there anyone that wants to talk more about subsection 1? Okay, hearing no one, can we move on just to subsection 2, 3, and the most important one, which I think Allison and Marcy just addressed, which is section 4, subsection 4. Marcy?
Yes, and again, we are asking that we also modify section 2 to say that the process must exclude prosecuting and law enforcement officials. So we're switching should to must, and that's our only modification to make it more clear. And then again, in section 4, that county plans let us know how they're going to make sure that the attorneys that they're hiring for contracts are able to provide coverage in all types of complexity of cases.
So Madam, this is Chris. I would make a motion to approve 22 sub 1 to get that part dealt with.
All right,
Second.
is there's a second, Allison Jaffe? Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And it would be to adopt, not a,
I got that. I gotta get that into my head. Thank you. Okay, and then to sub 4, basically, Marcy, for clarification, you're not for the contracted ones, you're trying to be a little bit more restrictive. They have to fly a notice and so forth. The rest of the language seems to imply a notification to the department of here's who we've selected and here's what our plan says we looked at for qualifications. But what if the qualifications were undermining what the job duty was really going to be doing? So if you want just notification, okay, so what do you do with that information, even if they hired someone that wasn't properly qualified?
So specific examples of this are we've had counties contract with individuals that have been only qualified to handle up to low B, but the counties expect them to take category A cases, which we have not approved them for.
Okay.
So we would like to know what county plans are going to put in place to ensure that if the county chooses to contract with someone that's not fully qualified, that they let us know how they're going to make sure that someone that is qualified will be present to either take the case from that attorney or to sit second chair with that attorney. So again, this is the counties telling us how to make sure that that attorney that's getting assigned those cases is able to handle them.
okay, is there any discussion? I guess we're looking now at 2, 3, and 4 together. Having already have already voted to adopt section 1. Is there any more discussion on 2, 3, and 4, or are we ready for? Is there in a workshop? Is there anybody else that wants to discuss 2, 3, and 4? Or 4, any piece of it? Because I'm not seeing, I don't have the capability of seeing people's hands. Marcy, does anybody want to talk?
No, no one wants to talk. And it looks like Kate Thomas has left the meeting, but she's coming back soon.
So we should wait?
Yes. So would you like me to go on to the next section?
Yes, please.
So in section 23, we are asking that subsection 2 be modified to clarify the municipal court judge. As we've all learned, that NRS 171.188 requires counties to use their public defender for justice of the peace cases as well as municipal court. So it's just adding that clarification. Counties are already taking action to make sure their plans encompass municipal court. And that's why we're just looking to add that language. And then in number 3, what we're hoping to add is a requirement that each plan must provide for a first and second tier of indigent defense representation. Many of our rural counties have their first tier in place, but we don't have a plan for backup. And what we're seeing happen is we're very reliant on that appointed counsel list to be able to provide coverage. And as you've kind of heard through these last couple of meetings, that it's really putting stress on those that list of appointed counsel and causing that hourly rate to really rise. So we're hoping to work with counties to say, okay, let's get that. We have that first tier in place, but let's get a second tier in place. So if your first tier has a conflict, this is the person that will take that matter and handle it. And of course, if they have a conflict, it would go out to the appointed counsel list. So what we're proposing in subsection A is that if a county uses multiple attorneys who are independent contractors, for example, Douglas County or Nye County, for the first tier representation, they have to describe to us how attorneys are assigned to those cases. How do they divvy up the cases? And we want to make sure that the distribution of those cases is on a rotational basis that's already in there and fair. And a first tier consisting of multiple independent attorneys or offices may constitute a first and second tier as determined by a department. Because we're seeing when there's multiple conflict or contract attorneys, they don't go out to that conflict list very often. They just handle it internally. However, subsection B would like to clarify that if a first tier attorney is an office of the public defender, and and the public defender is disqualified, the plan has to describe who the second tier is and how people in that tier are assigned cases. And then finally, we want to just clarify that counties may not rely upon the appointed counsel list to provide representation for first and second tier counsel. An exception to this may be requested from the department, and just to throw it out there, a possibility would be a county like Esmeralda. They very rarely have any sort of conflicts from their first tier, so it may not be necessary to enter into a contract, but that would be up to the county to tell us. And then in subsection 4, we just want to clarify that attorneys are also required to be present for pretrial release hearings, those initial 48-hour hearings. We didn't really have that language before in there, and that a plan must provide that a timely initial appearance or arraignment must not be delayed pending that indigency determination. And the plan must set forth the process for assigning or determining how that attorney will be present. So we're running into that with those counties that have multiple attorneys. We don't know who's supposed to be present for those 48-hour hearings. So we just want them to be able to tell us how they're doing things, so it's pretty clear. So those are the changes that we are requesting.
Marcy, I have one question. A plan must provide that a timely initial appearance, et cetera, et cetera. Is there statutory language that determines what a timely initial appearance is? Is it 24 hours? Is it 48 hours?
Kate Thomas is back, just for the record. So there was a recent case that came out, but the legislature has changed it to that initial appearance, that initial pretrial detention hearing has to happen within 48 hours of your arrest. So you're generally seen by that judge within 48 hours.
Thank you.
And I don't know if there's any other discussion or if you'd like us to go on to our next recommendation, or if you'd like to take.
I think it's fine if we go on unless anyone has questions on what Marcy just described in section 23. Okay, keep going.
And Peter's going to section 27.
Actually, Marcy, that's me. Okay, so section 27, it's only got one change, and that's really just to conform with the Davis language and with the monitor's repeated recommendations that we include the ABA defense function standards along with the other standards of performance.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions?
All right, who's got the next section?
I have the next one as well. So section 30 sort of just scoops in indigent defense providers that are within organized offices into our overall, kind of bucket. We just like to know who's in these offices, what their qualifications are. This language doesn't actually prevent them from working on any higher level cases than what they are qualified for, as long as there are supervising attorneys within the office. This is kind of how it happens in almost all public defenders' offices anyway. But it's just sort of spelling out that language, but also we want these people in our system so that we can provide them individually with all of our training notices and all the communication with our department. It's sort of like, some offices like a bottleneck, and we're not able to reach all of the attorneys independently. So we want to make sure that everybody's got access to all of the information, training, and otherwise that we have.
Okay, any questions about that? And then the next is section 31.
And I will be taking section 31. So in section 31, we're modifying or proposing modifying subsection 1 sub B to just lay out what that sufficient training or experience is for misdemeanor qualification. And that's just proof of completion of 6 hours of CLE, continuing legal education, related to indigent defense services, or attending a DIDS annual conference within the prior year. And either of those will constitute sufficient training or experience for the purpose of being qualified to provide misdemeanor indigent defense services. Subsection 2 is talking about setting forth the process in the plan. Instead of having a motion for appointment of an additional attorney, we're going to allow those counties to develop how they're going to get that second attorney on board. We're also adjusting section 32. I think that's, I'll be handling, oh, if we want to take this one, section 32 is just lowercase, so it's hard to read that it's a different section.
Oh, yeah. Can we just stay right now with 31? Because it's okay. Any questions on section 31? Any concerns from anyone? All right, Chris, you're
Nope, I'm fine.
Okay, section 32.
Sure, and in section 32, we're just modifying for a person seeking to be qualified for the category low B or below must. We have originally have been trial counsel along with other trial counsel in 2 or more bench or jury trials that we're trying to completion. We're inserting the word criminal before bench or jury to ensure they have the actual criminal practice and not just civil practice. It has been the case that a couple of attorneys have applied to qualify based on something as simple as an eviction trial or a small claims trial. And we're trying to make sure that these are actual trials that are going to be consistent with the criminal practice of law.
Sounds like a good idea. Okay, any questions or concerns about that? If not, hearing none, we're going to move on to section 36.
Madam Chair, if I could, Marcy brought to my attention that I neglected to discuss part of section 30. Could we do that before we move on?
Sure, thank you. I probably blew right over it. Go ahead.
I think it was my fault, but there's a second page going from page 9 to page 10. Number 6, we just add in municipalities to the already existing scheme there because we've had to add municipalities into our plans. And then number 7, I think we addressed this partially in another section earlier, but it's if a contract attorney does not have the qualifications necessary to handle the full range of cases required for the contract, the attorney may not be assigned to cases outside their qualification level unless a qualified first chair attorney is also appointed at county expense for every such case. The process for achieving this must be set forth expressly in the county's plan. Any questions about that?
I have a question. A county expense, but again, reimbursed by the state ultimately.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
It all goes to indigent defense expenses and the cap applies to that.
Okay. Anybody else have questions?
Oh.
Okay, so now we're going to go back to section 36.
And that would be me again, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
So in 36, we're again changing the well, not changing really. We're just adding some more clear definition of the amount of training experience required to handle juvenile cases. So in currently as it exists, you just have to be licensed in the state of Nevada and have knowledge and skills necessary to represent a child in these proceedings. And that's pretty vague requirements. So we're asking that we include that the person must be skilled in juvenile defense, and we would just require that there's proof of completion of 2 hours of CLE related to juvenile defense services within the prior year that constitute that sufficient training experience. The following subsection, we're also asking that they be familiar with and knowledgeable about adolescent development and special status of youth in the legal system. Again, this is actually a fairly specialized area of practice. Some attorneys very much specialize in this area, and we're really concerned, right? We don't just want anyone with a bar card basically showing up being able to handle these cases. We really want some specific requirements in here so that it's clear that those children are getting adequate counsel themselves.
Okay, any questions or concerns on section 36?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Todd Reese over at Crescent City. just briefly, when in reading the things that are being added in, Peter, you explained it a little bit, but in reading it, it seems that a person who has the knowledge and skills necessary to represent a child diligently and effectively would be skilled in juvenile defense. So I was just struggling to understand the difference between the two requirements.
Sure. I mean, there are other attorneys that handle child representation cases, guardians ad litem, family law attorneys that represent children. So this is just particularly adding that juvenile defense aspect to it in subsection C. While a lot of those skills and knowledge are transportable or transposable between the two areas of law, Part 3 really puts out the juvenile defense, that, you know, quasi-criminal aspect included there.
And also requires that CLE, so they're up to date, which is really important because this is an area of law that does change quietly. And so the CLE would certainly help practitioners and defenders know what was going on. Sometimes even the juvenile masters don't. How does that sound?
Okay, thank you. I think I still have some questions, but if I after reading it and considering this, if I have questions, I'll give Peter a call.
Okay. Understanding we're going to be moving to adopt these today, but doesn't mean.
I understand.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, now moving on to section 37.
I think I'm covering section 37 as well. So in this one, we're just modifying, mostly it's down there in subsection 2, where an attorney shall complete on an annual basis a minimum of 5 hours of CLE courses relevant to indigent defense services. We're basically removing part of an exception. So basically annually, any of the qualified attorneys on our list need to submit to our office a transcript proving that they've completed those 5 units of CLE, so that we can ensure that they're compliant with this provision. So that can be submitted by mail if somebody's so inclined, or typically electronically. We're going to provide a form on the website through the, I think it's the HAL form is what it's called. We're modifying section C because it normally be follow the minimum standards, but instead we're looking to, within the 72 hours, advise the department designee and county if the attorney takes employment as a prosecutor or judge, and or 2, if the attorney has been sanctioned by any court or state bar. So the first part of that is we definitely need to know if somebody is no longer a defense attorney, is instead taking work as a prosecutor, because 1, we need to not assign them cases or try and assign them cases. We need to ensure that they've been, that they're properly removed from certain communication channels, so that they're not receiving the kind of notices that we provide for training opportunities, things like that they might not otherwise be eligible for. And second, if they're sanctioned by any court or state bar, there is no requirement currently that they notify the department if they're sanctioned by any court or the state bar. And we picked the word sanction because we're not really talking about like a finding of ineffectiveness. We really do want to just know if there's a finding of contempt or a finding of a suspension of the license, something that's really going to affect their actual practice in the courtroom.
Okay, any comments or concerns about that? Okay, section 3.
Yeah, the subsection 3, we're removing that. There was an exception to that. Again, like I was telling you, the submission of the proof of compliance to CLE to our office. Basically, it was, we're going to chase you down and make sure you attended all of our CLE, but it's actually a really long list of people to keep track of. So it saves us a lot of staff time if those would just be submitted by the attorneys. And you should be certifying, if you're an attorney, annually your CLE requirements. Basically, if you just need to, you know, print out that page, email it to us, and that would qualify as proving that, satisfying that requirement.
Okay. So this would just be one more paper in addition to what we all send the state bar CLE committee, right?
Right.
And okay, all right. Any questions or concerns about that? All right, section 40.
So section 40 is me, and what we're trying to encompass here is the Davis stipulated consent judgment requires the department to review all contracts for indigent defense services and approve them at some point. The problem is that there's no requirement for the counties to send us their contracts and wait for us to approve them. So we're not really able to comply with the stipulated consent judgment, other than most of the counties that we're working with are, well, all of them are very great. They send us their contracts and they've kind of learned to send them our way when they're going to be entering them. So this just puts in regulation that specifically when an indigent defense provider, and I'm looking at subsection 11, that all contracts for indigent defense services must be approved by the department prior to execution, including subcontracts. So we just want to make sure we are required pursuant to the Davis stipulated consent judgment that we review all contracts, that we ensure that all the language that's required to be in regulation or by regulation to be in a contract is in a contract. So we're asking for a requirement that counties have to get those contracts to us so that we can comply with Davis. We are also asking for that ability to know when attorneys that provide indigent defense services for counties are entering into some sort of subcontractor agreement. We want to ensure that those requirements that those subcontractors comply with our minimum qualifications are covered in their contracts as well, and so that we know the terms. So those are the requests that are set forth in section 40.
Thank you, Marcy. Are there any questions or concerns about that?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Todd Reese over at Carson City again. On section 11, I understand there was a consent judgment in Davis. Unfortunately, this is applying to all the counties, and Carson City at least wasn't subject to the consent judgment of Davis. And again, like my comment in one of my first comments, I wasn't able to find an enabling language in the NRS to allow for this kind of reach into a county's contracting process. So I certainly don't want to give you legal advice, but I was going to suggest that you just contact your Deputy Attorney General about that.
Well, is she still on the line? Miss Long?
Yes, I'm still here. So I have not looked into basically NRS 180 regarding that specifically. So I guess right now I can't give you an advice toward that.
Okay, but would you have time to look into it going forward?
By when?
By, I don't know. You know, it's, I mean, I'll just tell you again, I mean, and obviously I don't want to put you on the spot. It's something just fundamentally, you know, we have a deputy district attorney for Carson City, basically, I guess, objecting to the executive director and this board's ability to look at contracts for indigent defense services and approve them prior to them being entered into. And I'm just telling you, since the state of Nevada is going to have to pay any judgment if the county, if any county enters into a contract that doesn't comply with, I understand Carson City's not a Davis County, but you understand that Davis sets a baseline and that this board has, and the state has stepped up in a commitment to assure that every indigent accused in this state gets competent representation. And once again, with respect, Carson City is not going to be paying for a huge IAC. You know, I represented, for example, a man who was on death row for 17 years based on ineffective assistance of counsel. And can you imagine what that, I mean, I represented him on the post-conviction. Can you imagine what that translated into? Jonelle knows if she's on this call, you know, 20 years ago in damages. The state has stepped up. I can't imagine that Carson City has a good faith objection to just providing the contracts to Marcy for approval. And for anyhow, that's just a policy argument.
This is Chris, but let me just piggyback on that. It's, you may not be a Davis now, but if your contracts lead us to something, you could become a Davis. And what we're trying to do is prevent this in the first place. So I with no disrespect, I think you have to apply the contracts.
You know, I'm not necessarily objecting to working with DIDS on the contracts. I believe, and Marcy, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I believe that we have provided our contracts to DIDS to review, and I can't recall if they got back to us or not on that. That was about a year ago, last time we hired a independent contractor. But I'm not suggesting that we or that we wouldn't be willing to work with this. And to take a step back, yes, absolutely. We are in the same ballpark as you, as wanting the best indigent defense services. Carson City has a long history of that, I believe. However, this regulation officially inserts itself into the city's contracting process, and there may be situations where the city isn't able to wait for the department to provide comment or approval, not comment, but approval of a contract before needing to enter into a contract. For instance, we have had situations where a conflict counsel has left, and we want to get that conflict counsel replaced as soon as possible. That may present an emergency situation where we might not have approval of a contract before the city would want to hire a conflict counsel, so that we don't have an interruption service for indigent defense. That said, that's kind of where we're coming from. I'm not suggesting at all that the city is not wanting to provide the best indigent defense services possible.
Right, and I appreciate that. There's 2 points to what I'd like to say. The state's paying for it, and the state is also stepping up to assume liability in the event Carson City contracts, there's terms of a contract, or there's a party to the contract that is later determined to be ineffective and detrimental to the rights of the accused. So this is again a different context. If you're concerned that there could be a delay, I assume you have a form the example you gave, you had conflict counsel leave, and then you had to hire somebody else real quickly. I'm assuming that the only thing you changed in that contract was the name of the contract, conflict counsel.
I believe you're essentially correct.
So I'm not reading this, and Marcy, correct me if I'm wrong. Marcy doesn't have, if the contract's there and it's approved as to form by the department, I don't see it causing an additional delay. And if you're really legitimately worried about a delay, if it's that important and you think it applies statewide, everybody, we could add, contracts contracts will be deemed approved unless something happens in writing within 30 days of submission to the department. I'm not sure what you're talking about delay. So anyhow, those are my thoughts. I'm sure other people have thoughts too.
Madam Chair, could I just add one comment on this regarding this regulation 40?
Absolutely.
So regulation 40, which requires these certain things to be in any contract between the county and the indigent defense provider, this has already been approved and is law in Nevada. All of the counties, including Carson City, we worked with in drafting their contracts as we went along. Some of them were already in existence, but as they had to be reviewed renewed, we have worked with them to make sure all of these provisions are in there. This last number 11 is really sort of just a formality because it wasn't stated expressly that they needed to provide these to us. But an argument could be made that because it was a regulation, because it was law, because it says every county's contracts have to include this stuff, that the counties already had to comply with this. It's again just sort of a technicality that we put in this last thing. And again, Carson cooperated with us just like everyone has, but this isn't a big fundamental change.
And Madam Chair, to add to that, looking at the stipulated consent judgment on page 12, line 16, it says that defendants through the board shall require all future county contracts for the provision of indigent defense services to be approved by the executive director or a designee prior to execution. So we took the language out of that stipulated consent judgment And we just clarified and placed it into the regulation, like Tom has said, we're just clarifying the process for that. And we believe that this would fall again under that NRS 180.320 subsection 4, that gives us that ability, or excuse me, the 180, I'm on the wrong one. But the subsection 4 that says the board shall adopt any additional regulations as it deems necessary and convenient to carry out the duties of the board. And that's as contained in NRS 180.320. So we are specifically required, this board agreed to comply with this Davis stipulated consent judgment. And again, this is a problem that we've seen, is that counties are working with us, but they're not always giving us those contracts before execution like Davis is requiring.
Thank you. Do we have a motion? Is it appropriate time? It's now, yeah.
I'd like to make a motion. So we're discussing now section 22, starting with number 2. We already approved number 1. So section 22, 2, it'd be 2 through 4, section 23, in its entirety, section 27 in its entirety, section 30, section 31, section 32 and 36, section 37, section 40, all of those in their entirety. I move to approve all of those.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion?
We're adopting it, right?
Yeah, we're adopting.
Adopting, sorry.
Madam Chair, point of clarification, and maybe Ms. Long will have to answer this. Do we have to go back out of the workshop for the board to do this? No, Marcy's shaking her head.
No.
Okay.
Okay, I think we move to adopt now and then we close the workshop is my understanding. Okay, so there's a motion, there's a second, all in favor, say
And
aye.
just to clarify, it includes section 22.
Yes, ma'am, except for
Yes,
we
thank you.
previously, we'd be here
We
until.
beat that horse to death. Yeah.
Yeah, Tony, I miss you. Okay. So there's a motion, there's a second, there's no further discussion, and all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Or is anybody opposed?
Madam Chair, I just want to say I never want perfection to be the enemy of good, and I'm going to vote aye on this, on that motion. I still don't agree with section 22 and taking the authority away from the county to promote from within without advertising.
Thank you, Joni. Understood. All right. So we got to the yays and we understand, Joni, and thank you. And there's no nays. Am I correct? Anybody doesn't want to approve? All right. So the motion to adopt has passed. And now we're going to close the workshop, and we're closing the comments on the workshop. My dog apparently has something to say, and move back into the regular agenda. And as far as I'm looking at it, we have, Ms. Long, we've now handled number 10. Is that correct? Which is the draft the regulations, direct them to, or is that a separate item? We're now going to.
Sorry, Madam Chair, it appears to be a separate item in the
Okay.
workshop. You just moved to adopt. So now to direct DIDS to draft the
Okay.
language.
Thank you. So now, is there a motion to direct DIDS to draft proposals in line with the workshop and the recommendations that we just adopted at the conclusion of the workshop?
This is Chris.
So moved.
I'll second Joni then.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries. Thank you. All right, we're getting there, guys. Agenda item 11, scheduling future meetings. We're confirming the next meetings will be November 2nd, 2023 at 1 p.m. That'll be a board meeting. February 1st, 2024 at 1 p.m., a board meeting. May 2nd, 2024 at 1 PM, a board meeting, and August 1st, 2024 at 1 PM, a board meeting. Is everybody good with those dates and times?
I'm still alive.
Well, next year's gonna be a rough one. Okay, I don't think we need a formal action on that. Thank you, Ms. Long. All right, any public comment?
Laura, I just want to say, I think for somebody who's never chaired a meeting, you did an amazing job.
Absolutely.
You did.
You guys, thank you. Okay, well, I always enjoyed our chair's participation, and now I'm desperate for him to come back, but thank you guys. It was actually a tougher meeting than I think we expected, but we got a lot done in large part, probably entirely thanks to our fabulous staff and deputy AG. So I guess we have no public comment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and particularly for our intrepid staff. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.